right, y'all. We are so excited to have you all back again. What I'm hoping for as you are making time for this series is that this is building you up, that this is energizing you, this is recharging you. We intentionally named this series Recharge Your Leadership because we wanted to give you some tools, we want to give you some encouragement and some wisdom on how you're going to keep yourself energized as you continue the work of pouring into other people. And so every one of my guests, that has been a part of their assignment. And it's no different from our guest today, Angela Garmon. And I just want to say, Angela, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to what you're going to be sharing with us today.
You're welcome, Kendra. Super excited to be here and to have this conversation with you.
They will already know your bio and more of the technical parts and aspects of who you are. But I would love for you to share a little bit of your journey of how you became a business leader, like what brought you to this point and season in your life.
That's a great question. One of the probably most pivotal points in my life was when my career was ending in hospitality. So the entire executive committee had jumped ship, and we were going through the hotel that I was at was going through an acquisition. And so within 2 weeks of that announcement, I became the most senior person at the hotel to execute this sale of the hotel. And so I realized over that season that people either fight, flight, or freeze when faced with change. And so a few years later, I started a business. And as I look back over every single season of my life, it was that moment that really stood out to me. I call that my pivotal moment
Mhm.
that really highlighted just a season where I felt so alone in leadership, and I never wanted anyone to feel like that. And so I started my consulting firm to support leaders across the nation as they navigated through change so they didn't have to be alone. And so now I equip them with the right tools or at least a space to where they can really explore what's going on in their minds and in their heart and with their team.
Yeah, those defining moments, I tell you, woof. You're giving us like the very Cliff Note version, right, of
Mhm.
that. And there is so much that happens during those defining moments, not
Mhm.
just from an external perspective, right, but internally, what is happening on the inside of you. So when you look back at the Angela you were then, how would you describe where you were at when you were going through that transition?
Mm, I would have to say I was lonely. I was afraid.
Mhm.
Truthfully, I was hurt and probably a bit angry because I had been with the company for 13 plus years and
Mhm.
I didn't see myself leaving the company anytime soon. I mean, we grow up and I grew up in the Midwest, and our parents told us if you wanted a
Mhm.
stable life and a good retirement, then you stay with the company forever, right? And so it was that moment in time where I realized, man, there is nothing really stable about this corporate space, and everything is an illusion, right?
Mhm.
But most importantly, what I learned, just truly being reflective in that time, is that people look for leadership. And even though we might be going through these really difficult seasons of our life, someone is looking for you or someone else to lead. And so it was in that moment where I believe that God revealed to see the people. And the one thing that I was most happy about is that we had over 120 employees, and then we were able to either get them placed with, the company that we were working with, or get them
Mhm.
placed within the um the hospitality team that I was part of. And so I think that in that season, even though we're going through these seasons of hurt, we got to remember that everybody else is or other people are impacted as well. And so I think that that probably leads to our conversation around empathy too, right? Is even though
Absolutely.
we're going through our own season, everybody else is going through theirs too.
Yeah. And when I was thinking about us talking about leading with empathy,
Mhm.
the one of the reasons I thought that was so important for the group of women that are participating in this is because I think it's easy for us to know how to see what other people need and
Mhm.
be supportive of that
Mhm.
and work to give them what they need, but it's not as easy for us to give that empathy to ourselves.
Yeah.
And when you think about your life and as you've made those different transitions, I'm probably going to keep using that word because it just really stood out to me. Because I feel like, I don't know if you ever heard this saying in church, you're either in a transition, coming out of a transition, or going into a transition, right?
Right, right.
So it doesn't matter, whoever is on here, we know that everybody has some form of a transition in their life.
Mhm.
So, what have you learned for yourself specifically first about what have you needed to do to recognize what you needed to give yourself during those times of transition?
Mm, that's good. So I went through a really difficult season of life in 2014. I went through a divorce. I lost my community. I felt like I lost everything.
Mhm.
And shortly after that, I removed myself from my position as well, and started all over, right? And so I remember going through this season, just kind of walking through it, kind of in a robotic way, if you would, just showing up, just being present. And what I realized, I was sitting in a Bible study with women. It was probably like a year or so later. And I remember the lady on the big jumbo screen, she said, "No one is beyond grace." And it took me going through that season and sitting there in this women's group almost a year later to realize that I had never extended myself grace. And so as you talk about being empathetic, just to your point, we have the ability to see what the needs of other people are. We have the ability to forgive other people for their trespasses, but we neglect ourselves often. And I realized in that season, in that moment, that I had neglected myself, that I did not extend myself grace, and that I was the hardest on myself over that season of my life. And so I think the biggest thing that I learned now is to give myself grace and to ask myself that question, like, Angela, have you extended yourself grace, or where haven't you extended yourself grace? And so I really intentionally pause now, especially when I'm feeling a little lost or a little confused or a little frustrated with myself. I ask myself, where do I need to give myself grace at?
Where do you need to give yourself grace?
Hmm.
Whew, that is that question is like really thought provoking. Where
Hmm.
do you need to give yourself grace?
Hmm.
And I just want you all to pause and think about that for yourself. Where do you need to give yourself grace? And I even wrote down what you said is the no one is beyond grace. And the reason why that really touched me is I don't necessarily think that there's some things that we know like they're in the forefront of our mind, and then there's things that are further back
Hmm.
and we're not necessarily conscious of them. And I think that one of the reasons that we experience the burnout or we find ourselves becoming overly, we know we're overworked, we know that we need more time, is because we haven't given ourselves the grace to be human.
Hmm.
We haven't given ourselves the grace to make mistakes.
Hmm.
To we haven't given ourselves the grace to ask for help, to let our guard down long enough to allow other people to help us.
Hmm.
So for in that season for you, Do you remember, were there certain people that you were able to lean on and depend on to support you?
To be completely transparent, I don't think that I was vulnerable enough to open up to anyone. I think that we get trapped into these silo buckets where it's like no one understands what I'm going through, or people will judge me. And again, just that season was full of judgment, and I just didn't know who to trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you turn inwards to see, or at least I turned inwards to really try to understand what was going on with me. And in the process, I probably blamed myself, for a lot more than what was truly just mine to own.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this quote as I was preparing. I'm not quite sure who wrote it, but it says, "Seeing with the empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another." And when I think about even being empathetic to my own self, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see me, right? I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't really feel what was going on because my my heart was just, I felt like it was just broken. And so how do you see yourself? How do you feel when you don't have that capacity to feel, right?
Yes.
And so to your point, who I think that if I look back over that season of my life, I wouldn't have distanced myself from the
Mm-hmm.
people that really loved me. I would have leaned in more and been vulnerable more to where I could get the help and the support that I needed over that period of time.
So you are an executive coach,
Hmm.
and so one of the things that means is you spend a lot of your day, and you
Hmm.
correct me, we're both coaches, so you correct me. So you spend a lot of your time listening to and supporting leaders
Yeah.
in the work that you do.
Mhm.
And as you observe them, what have you noticed is the difference between leaders who lead with empathy versus those who don't?
Yeah, I think that a leader that leads with empathy tend to have people that are people that feel like they have the ability to be vulnerable, right? They have that ability to share what's on their mind. It's typically an environment to where people feel comfortable with, whereas the leaders that aren't very empathetic, their team can be extremely shut down. There might be a little bit of paternalism where they're just waiting for someone to tell them what to do.
Mhm.
And so when I think about empathetic leaders, I think about I go back to like my first job, Mr. Allen. He was probably the most empathetic leader that I had ever experienced. And I worked for Walgreens, and we were in a very tough neighborhood. And so people were always stealing. And I remember he caught these young kids stealing.
Mhm.
And he brought them in and he said, son. He addressed them as son, right? And he said, what would your life be like if I called the cops? And so
Mhm.
he always had these conversations with them that humanized them, right? Instead of villainized them. And
Mhm.
when I think about empathy, I think about the humanity that's involved with that ability to actually see the person and not just the circumstance or the situation that has placed them in that, right?
Mhm.
I think that he had this innate ability to really see what people could be, and he brought that out of them. And so, yeah, so I think that empathetic leaders will always see the person over the problem, and
Mhm.
they create an atmosphere where people can be vulnerable in themselves and even apologize for their mistakes and make amends and not feel like it's the final, or, there's finality to it, right? Or that
Yes.
it's the end of the road. So,
Yeah. That is such a great example.
mhm,
And the way you describe that, being able to see the person
mhm,
more than the problem. So if I was your client and I
Mhm.
came to you and I told you that part of the reason why, and I may not even be able to articulate this to be honest, but if I told you that part of the reason why I'm feeling burnt out and I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling all this stress in my body is because I am assigning people to do things and they're not getting the work done. That's
Mm.
what that's my problem, Angela.
Right?
If they would just do what I told them to do,
Uh-huh.
how would you coach me around that?
Mm. So the problem is, if I just told them, if they would just do what I told them to do,
If they would just do their job, I'll say it that way.
do their job.
If they would
If
just do their job, Angela, I wouldn't have all this stress. I wouldn't feel burnout.
Yeah, the first thing, the first question that I would ask is, whenever we um, coaching isn't about other people, right? Coaching
Mhm.
is specifically about you.
Mhm.
And so I would just ask you, what is leading to burnout in your life?
Mhm.
And typically, it's not other people or their lack of responses. There's something internal, something that's going on within you, right?
Mhm.
And so we will really get to the crux of like, what is burnout? Because one theory that I like to use, or one method that I like to use, is really that iceberg method, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Where it really gets underneath. So we identify what is, we only see what's on the surface, which is that burnout.
Yes.
But when we drill down into it, what are we telling ourselves? What
Mhm.
are our mental models that are shaping the way we show up? And then what's even deeper than that? Like, what are the beliefs, the core beliefs in me, right?
Mhm.
So even when you say they're not doing what they need to do, is it that they're not doing what they need to do? Or is there something deeper that's going on that maybe like, and what typically happens that is that we find out that our clients are scared
Mhm.
to have those tough conversations, or they believe that someone doesn't like them, or something about that environment is not really working through. And so we really dig down deep. So even though we
Yeah.
might stay surface in this conversation, man,
Yes.
deeper conversation that leads to deeper results and deeper impact.
Yeah. And the reason why I brought that up because I know without a shadow of a doubt, the women that are white, well, part of my problem is my team. If they would just do this and if they would just do that, then I wouldn't feel so much stress. I wouldn't have so much I wouldn't be nearing burnout. And I knew because I know you. You were like, no, we're not letting you off the hook that easy.
That's projection. That's
Yes,
projection,
yes,
right?
yes.
So how do we now really dig down into
Yeah.
what's causing the burnout? And I think that, when we think about burnout, though, Kendra,
Mhm.
there are so many different layers to us.
Yes,
We're mothers in many cases.
yes,
Some of us are spouses,
yes.
of us are friends,
Mhm.
we have like a multitude of different things that are really vying for our attention.
Mhm.
And so much of that can lead to burnout because more often than not, as women, as nurturers, we struggle with saying no.
Yes.
And that can be the catalyst to a lot of things. Or we struggle with how are people going to perceive us, right?
Mhm.
Or if I don't engage in something, they're going to think that I'm not a team player. And then if you start adding ethnicity into it, I mean, there's so many
Totally.
different layers
Yes.
we could really bring out in this conversation. And I know that we don't really have a lot of time, but again, that goes back to the iceberg, what is really going on within us
Mhm.
that is causing the burnout. And that is where we dive into that deeper conversation around what else is going on that we need to discuss.
Yeah. So you describe when you talk about that iceberg,
Mhm.
that is really what wellness retreat, this 3 day, is really designed to help you start looking deeper, because there's a lot of things that we're going to see on the surface. There's a lot of things that we know that we can see that are happening externally, but what we can't see is what's happening on the inside of us. And so, to your point, this is a time for you to dig deeper below the surface, for you to look deeper below the surface and start to identify what are some areas that I want to take a closer look at, to understand, like you talked about, those beliefs that you have might be an area. When you think about strategies or tools that you would give to a client for them to have more of that empathy with themselves, what are some of the go-to strategies that you would recommend for them?
So empathy for themselves, I would definitely say I would create a wellness journey for myself. The last couple of years, I have actually taken more time to get like massages,
Mhm,
times to journal, time to really just even if it's just setting aside time for myself, just for quiet time,
mhm,
that has been really pivotal for me in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's self-care, right? It's making
mhm,
sure that I pause long enough to take care of my body, and that means so many different things to me, especially post diagnosis of cancer, right?
mhm,
So you have to really, I think that that diagnosis really made me pause to realize, Angela, you got to take care of yourself.
mhm,
Because life will go on with or without you.
mhm,
And if you want to extend, if as women, if we want to extend our lives, we have to take care of ourselves first. And so making sure that we're prioritize, well, for me, making sure that I'm prioritizing myself over other people. And I know that might seem self-centered, especially it might even seem counterintuitive to what we were taught. But, if we prioritize ourselves, then we can be the best version of ourselves for those that are around us. And the one thing that I often share, especially when I'm speaking, is that there's always someone watching us, whether it's our kids, whether it's our friends, or whether it's even complete strangers. But pausing, but like putting yourself, prioritizing yourself or your self-care first will show other people that it's okay
yes.
for you to take care of yourself, take care of your needs first. Because again, going back to what I shared, as long as if I'm the best version of me, then I can show up healthier and happier for other people that are around, and everybody gets the benefits of it.
Just like your smartphone needs regular charging, so do you. Without regular recharging, your energy and spirit can run out, leaving you feeling drained and ineffective. Join the Strong Her Leadership Coaching Cohort to build soul care habits that prioritize your well being. Nurture your inner self, not just to care for others, but to sustain your own health and happiness. Strengthen your capacity to lead with confidence and resilience. Prioritize yourself and see the difference it makes in your life and leadership. Learn more at strongher.me/leadership cohort. What is your philosophy
Mhm.
about self-care? Because I know that's something that we still struggle to understand the value
Mhm.
and the importance of it. What is your personal philosophy about self-care?
Yeah, I think for me, self-care is that prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about my life and just the history of my life, I haven't always put myself first. And
Mm-hmm.
so giving myself permission to self-prioritize, that's self-care first and foremost. Because people will literally drain you,
Mm-hmm.
if you let them.
Mm-hmm.
And so going back to childhood, right? Everything is core beliefs. So going back to that iceberg, everything is our belief systems, our values. And I think I remember how our family taught us, and it's just the little things, right? When you're fixing plates, you fix the children's plates first, or back in our days, you fix the men plate
That's
first.
right.
Might
Mm-hmm.
even start with the elders first, then the men, then the children eat, then you eat, right? And so it's little things like that that's embedded in us at a very young age, which ultimately says that, Angela, you're low on the priority list, right? Everybody else eats before you. And when we think about life, life is about this give and take. And so if you're constantly giving or prioritizing other people, then that's constantly taking away from you. So I feel like self-care is flipping that and prioritizing yourself first, making sure that you quote unquote eat first, right? And eating might be even listening or feeding on the word of God. It might be meditation. It might even literally be stopping long enough to feed yourself because I can go, a few hours without eating and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't ate, right? But it's making sure that I have, and let me just say this, Kendra, I don't always get it right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I notice that Angela, you're not self-prioritizing, then I try to self-prioritize. I make it an every effort every single day to prioritize myself. And so it might even be I started yoga, so it might even be yoga practices. It might be meditation, journaling. So to me, self-care is self-prioritization.
Yeah, I wrote that down. Give yourself permission to self-prioritize. That's what self-care is.
Mhm.
And the idea that inverting the pyramid where we are accustomed to being at the bottom of the pyramid.
Mhm.
And I think all of us, we watch the women in our lives. I know I have
Mhm.
watched the women of our lives. I'm so thankful to say my mom was in her 60s the first time she went to therapy.
Mhm.
In her 60s, because she spent her whole adult life prioritizing everything and everybody. My mom has been a caregiver for family members. She cared for us when we were kids growing up. She worked a full-time job.
Mhm.
And then she got into her 60s and realized there's her life imploding. Everything starts to implode, right? Because
Mhm.
you've been doing this, you've been giving making everything else a priority, everybody else a priority. And then you get to this certain stage in your life, and whatever it is, for everybody is different, right? For some people it's getting older, for some people it's all your kids are grown, you got grandkids now. Everybody looks different. For some of us, it's health challenges, whatever it is, and then you find yourself, wow, everything is falling apart.
Yeah.
And then you finally decide, I'm going to give myself permission to make myself a priority.
Mhm.
And you know what that looks like. I don't want to say specifically what that looks like for every person. Um, because I guess what I'm always trying to balance when we talk to people about this is, and I would love your thoughts on this. How do you help, or how do we encourage women to self-prioritize and not become self-absorbed?
I think that one, knowing the difference between the two, right?
Mm. Hmm.
Um, Self-prioritization is this act of making sure that you show up the best version of you so
Yeah.
that you care for other people. Being self-absorbed to me just means that there isn't any room for anyone else. It's only
Mm.
about you.
Will
And
you
so
repeat that again?
we might have to hit replay. But yeah, being self-absorbed means that it's only about you and that there isn't any room for anyone else. And that self-prioritization just means that you are you're making sure that you're the best version of you. You're prioritizing yourself to be the best version of you so that you can be the best version for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about that, I mean, I think I'll drop it right there
Mm-hmm.
because it's just, just knowing the difference between the two. I don't believe that our life was created to just to just to just take from others, right? I believe that God has put us on this earth to have community, to be a reflection of Him,
Mm-hmm.
and to care for the souls of those people that are around us. And I believe that self-prioritization allows us to do that best. Because when we're grounded and rooted in Him and we show up in His light, we can care for everybody or for people that are around us, right? And so, and if there isn't any space for that, then that's where we got to question, how are we showing up and how are we living our life? And even if we don't believe in a higher power, right? You got to believe that there's something greater than you.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, how are you out there changing the world? And so,
Woo. Yes, yes to everything. Amen. I'm your amen corner right now.
right. Shoot, we have
So,
such a bigger purpose.
yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to, so I just want to, I really like to wrap up by giving you an opportunity. Is there anything that we didn't talk about in regards to empathy for yourself that you wanted to share that you didn't have a chance to share?
No, not empathy for yourself, maybe empathy for others.
Yes.
There's a total lack. I think that in some cases, there's a total lack for empathy for others.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
what would you want to share about, so as I am prioritizing myself,
mhm, mhm,
as I'm giving myself permission to self-prioritize,
mhm,
and I'm leading a team,
mhm.
how would you advise me to be more empathetic as a leader?
So one of the tips that I always do, and this goes back to our earlier conversation, is to create this space, create a coaching environment, right? So always leaning in with curiosity. I find that the most empathetic leaders lead with curiosity instead of talking all the time or being that leader that's always feels like they have to say something. Ask questions and give your team the opportunity to really share what's on their minds. Because when you ask those open-ended questions and those questions that are thought-provoking, you will learn so much about those that are around you. And so typically whenever I'm working with a leader, I always ask them, well, what kind of questions are you asking your team, right? Especially when they say, well, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? So what is it that they're hearing? How, and so I say, so first and foremost, create that coaching environment to where you could really lean into your team. So when I was in the hospitality industry, I learned this thing called the 5 human truths. So people always want to be understood. They always want to reach their potential. They always want to feel special. We always want to be in control, and we all want to maximize our potential. I hope I got all 5 of those. If not, hold me to it, and I'll get them back over to you. But whenever you're actually listening to people, you can find which one of those 5 human truths aren't being met just by asking the right questions. And so if someone says something to the effect of, well, you don't under you no one ever listens to me anyways, then you can see that they don't feel like they're understood. And so now you can ask questions around deeper understanding of how they're feeling, what they're going through, or what changes you could make, right? So creating that coaching environment, knowing and understanding that we all have these core truths that need to be met, and then actively listening to make sure that you're asking the right questions that will lead to a space of vulnerability and lead to a space to where your team really feels as though they're understood.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that because I think that was very insightful and helpful because knowing the importance and the value of empathy as a leader
Mhm.
and wanting to make sure because I do think that part of the reason sometimes that we are so stressed is because we haven't been curious. We haven't asked those questions from our team. We haven't learned a new skill
Mhm.
around how to coach them
Mhm.
so that it would actually lighten our load. If you feel that you have to do everything, if you feel that your team is not living up to their part, then that could be part of the reason why you're feeling stressed. And it could be as simple as, are you asking enough questions? Are you listening to what your team has to say?
Yeah. And I often ask leaders, what feels lighter for you? Actually carrying the load or guiding people through, right? So
Mhm.
are you really helping your people are you really guiding them through the situation, right? And I feel like leaders should be able to really influence their team behavior. And if you're really truly listening to your team, then you won't have to do that heavy lifting. You
Mhm.
don't have to asking the right questions. It will unlock the doors to where your team, your other leaders are going to have the answers for themselves, and you don't have to do it all.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, creating that space to where you're paying attention and actively listening is important and crucial.
So we will make sure that they have some type of a resource or handout that lists those 5 human truths because yeah, I think that's so important. And you just made such a really great connection between how much are we relying on our team and allowing them to help do the heavy lifting. It's like the saying, many hands make light work, right? And that's very true. It's very true. And so if you are empowering each person on that team to do their part, then it will lighten the load for you as a leader.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate the connection that you made with that. So thank you for that.
Yes, of course.
So now I know that people are going to say, okay, I need to talk to Angela more. So how would they stay connected to you beyond them watching this?
Well, I am on pretty much all the social media platforms. And then also you can reach me at argccgroup.com. That's my website, or angelagarmon.com.
Okay. All
And stay
right, Angela.
connected.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I appreciate it. I have so many thoughts, and I'm just gonna leave them there for now and just say thank you.
I appreciate you, Kendra.